Well, today we're going to finish up the Middle Ages, basically. Talk about Pope Urban II and the Crusades, William of Normandy, Battle of Hastings, Magna Carta, and the Estates General. Not a lot of topics, a lot of little smaller things in between to talk about. Essentially, we see Europe trying to wake up from the nightmare that was the Middle Ages. We're seeing slow progress in some fronts, not much, but a little bit. We also see some disasters in other areas. But Europe is growing slightly. Here at page 245, you see a single graphic here talking about growth population in Europe. Greece and the Balkans, population increased from about 5 million to 6 million. A good portion of that was the Byzantine Empire. Like I said, they had briefly stabilized by the 11th century, but still having a lot of problems. Italy doubles in population those 3 centuries, from 5 million to 10 million. They're nowhere near what it had been in its time of the Roman Empire. France saw its population go from 6 million in 81,000 to 19 million by 1340. Britain from 2 million to 5 million. Germany and Scandinavia from 4 million to nearly tripling to just under 12 million. I see population increases all over Europe. The farms are stabilizing, food production was up, population, like I said, long periods of relative peace and stability instead of the constant chaos and civil war you'd always see during most of the Middle Ages. So things are settling down. National borders starting to emerge and solidify, and building more clear lines of control over some areas are becoming more apparent. Then you get into the 11th and 12th century. It's also where religion had been such a powerful component of the lives of ordinary people beforehand. It's coming even more so at this point. It was real religious near frenzy emerging in the 11th and 12th centuries. The real revival and interest in church and church activities. A lot of excitement for it. But also, you start seeing some level, some drive for real religious conformity. Particularly among the ordinary people of Europe, a lot of support for driving out Muslims and Jews alike. Example, up before the 11th century, before the First Crusade in 1095, Jews were the only religious minority in Europe that was allowed to practice openly. But Jews soon became a target of these conformist drives by these very fundamentalist forces. Actually, any groups that were not 110% pro-Catholic were targeted. They immediately became the Jews. And Jews had long been kind of on the outskirts of a European society. They had a lot of slurs being made against them for a long time. Roman emperors, after the Roman Christianized, blamed Jews for the crucifixion of Christ. Which, of course, for political reasons they had to, because it was the Roman army that actually went through with it. But after the Crusades were launched in the Middle East, this drive tried to root out to heresy in the mainland of Europe. Particularly in 1215, you have something called the Fourth Lateran Council. So there have been public burnings of Jewish books across Europe. And the Fourth Lateran Council basically said that Jews had to distinguish themselves from Christians by either wearing masks or ribbons or even yellow badges. And encouraged the development of basically a segregation between Christians and Jews, encouraging them to live in ghettos. It's a real anti-Semitism developing here in Europe and expanding rapidly with the Fourth Lateran Council. Now, ghetto, it means something different from what it means in the modern United States. Ghetto is basically a Yiddish word. It basically meant a separate place. Next, as these ghettos developed, basically had Christian areas and these Jewish areas were basically walled off, completely separate from the Christian community. Now, because a lot of Jews had a lot of certain skills were needed in that community or village or city, they were usually kept around. There's a lot of skilled labor. And also one thing, because in Judaism there isn't a moral ban on such things as charging money interest, like there was in early Christianity, laws against usury. Jews were the only ones who could actually operate a bank. Because the way banks operate is they charge interest. You deposit your money, they take that money, loan it out, and the interest rates, part goes to the bank for profit, part goes back to the depositor. Because banks operate on lending interest, Jews could operate banks, Jews could loan money. That's equivalent to bank that in the Middle Ages. So that's where Jews all start picking up a really bad reputation as being greedy, which really is not case of no different from anybody else. Just that they just happen to be able to operate the banks. There were some Christian merchants in Italy who were starting to trying to loan money, but to get around it, they basically would loan you money in one type of currency and demand repayment in another, playing on different currency rates to make the profits. But Fourth Lateran Council encouraged this marginalizing Jews in Europe and discrimination against them. They're living in separate areas, and what ended up happening, though, is over the centuries, these ghetto areas continued, segregated areas, continued across Europe. And when Jews, particularly from Eastern Europe, started immigrating to the United States in the 1800s, what you have in the United States was these ethnic neighborhoods. Neighborhoods basically just mostly people from one ethnic group lived: Jews, Russians, Poles, Italians, Irish, so forth. So the term ghetto came with them. But because of how housing discrimination in the United States and segregated neighborhoods were usually much more economically depressed, ghetto in the United States by the 20th century came to be defined basically as a very poor neighborhood. And that's where this comes from. Since this anti-Semitism was encouraged, it expanded and very, very violent in some instances as time went on. 1290, King Edward I of England expelled all Jews from England. 1306, the French also expelled all Jews from France. And what it's going to have happening here by the 1490s in Spain, once it organizes as a kingdom, is the Jews are being expelled from Spain as well. So essentially all of Western Europe, the Jews are being pushed out. There'll still be a few living there, if you wander back later, but basically they're pushed out of Western Europe into Central and Eastern Europe. By the time you get to this point, you have such nations as Poland are welcoming Jews into their country because a lot of Jews were skilled laborers. Something those countries needed that in Eastern Europe. So the bulk of the Jewish population of Europe shifted to Eastern Europe. That's going to be significant when we get to World War II. You have these reform popes also trying to change the nature of the church, trying to root out corruption. And they're also playing into this kind of new religious frenzy, trying to purify the church from any heretical or corrupt influences. And the Crusades were seen as part of that. Now here's how the Crusades ended up developing. I'll pour a handout for you here. Let's study this closely. Now the Crusades. What's happening is the Muslims are launching a new offensive against the Byzantines in Asia Minor. They're having problems, and the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I is asking Europe, the West, for help. Essentially, by this point, the Muslims are carving a big chunk into the heart of Asia Minor, and the Byzantine armies are overwhelmed. They're falling back, basically chipped away at a little at a time. So there are a bunch of different countries in the West, but it appeals especially to the head of the Roman Catholic Church, since he had so much influence over all the nations of Europe, and could better organize and appeal to different nations to send armies to Constantinople's aid. So you have Pope Urban II. He was Pope from 1088 to 1099. At this point, the Holy Lands had been basically the area of ancient Israel. Jerusalem had been under Muslim control for more than 400 years. There would still be Christian pilgrims going to those regions every so often, not many, but a few. But Catholic Church is now claiming they're being harassed, and Alexius I's invitation to asking for help, Urban II decides to take advantage of it. So he's at a church conference in Clermont, France. Pope Urban declares that Christianity is under attack in the Holy Lands, and the duty of all Christians to rise up, take up arms, and reclaim the lands of Christ for the Roman Catholic Church. It is their religious duty. And if they die in the effort, then they'll be die as martyrs for the church and be guaranteed a place in heaven. No purgatory, just straight to heaven. So he calls this crusade be the first of about at least eight major ones. And in the excitement of this time period, people rising up, excited about it, taking up arms, marching by the thousands to Constantinople. And so they start organizing, start marching along. These men don't, a lot of them, sometimes, some of them are trained troops sent out by the manorial lords, a couple kings sending out the troops. A lot of them just volunteers, very little training. They gather, they start marching off, and in 1098 they reach Constantinople. The Emperor Alexius sees huge rabble, these thousands of men under arms, excited about marching on to Jerusalem. So here is Alexis's help. What he sees is thousands of men in a frenzy demanding passage through his city. People who are under very little control. He is nervous, so he quietly ushers them through the city and into Asia Minor and up against the Muslim armies. In 1098, crusading armies, mostly French, they seized the city of Antioch in northern Syria. And so seizing it in heavy fighting. Should be a map of Crusades in here. And here you go. Page 300, see a map of Crusades, main routes of the crusading armies. And this group mostly French, some Germans, a couple Italians, but mostly French. They've taken Antioch in heavy fighting. Muslim armies are hurled back, and at that point, they march into Jerusalem by the next year, seizing the city in heavy fighting. Estimates how many people died range from about 20,000 to 70,000, mostly civilians. Said some of the castles they were fighting in, the blood was so much blood being spilled that it reached up to their ankles. And people slaughtered left and right, and eventually Christian armies have taken Jerusalem and set up the Crusader states. 4 Crusader states were established. The first was the County of Edessa. County of Edessa was basically northern Syria, in around Antioch, city of Edessa itself. Wasn't quite Antioch though, but Antioch establishes its own principality. And that was basically northern and central Lebanon, portions of northwestern Syria. County of Tripoli, which is basically southern Lebanon, portions of southwestern Syria, and then the Kingdom of Jerusalem. That's basically modern Israel, most of the occupied territories, West Bank, Gaza, some areas of areas east of the Jordan River, the East Bank, portions of far western Jordan. So it's these 4 Crusader states are trying to establish themselves and basically reclaiming the Holy Lands for Christianity. Well, it doesn't work out quite as well as the Crusaders had hoped. So the armies are always under siege. The rulers are kind of so-so. And essentially, they're in the middle of a military occupation.
What's the last place? Prison?
Western Jordan,
Oh, sure.
in the East Bank. They say the Muslims, they say as strongly as they see Jerusalem as Christians see a holy city for them, Muslims see Jerusalem as a holy city for themselves as well. And neither side wants the other one to take it, but Muslims, after the defeat, they're reorganizing. In 1144, they launched an attack on the county of Edessa, taking it over fairly quickly. Again, for military attacks, for defense by the Crusader armies. So 1144, Edessa goes back under Muslim control. So in response, the Second Crusade is called for. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux calls for a crusade response, meaning that the Holy Lands must be held for the church. And the Second Crusade, between 1147 and 1149, the calling in two of the larger armies of two of the larger nations in Europe. Louis VII of France and his army. And Emperor Conrad III of the Holy Roman Empire, basically Germany. So they're fighting it out. France and Germany basically fighting against the Muslim forces in Crusader states for these 2 years, but we weren't able to make a lot of progress. A lot of violence, for this land going back and forth, but basically not a lot of progress here. Then get to the Third Crusade. At this point, the Muslims have a new leader, Saladin, a warlord, who basically appeals to all the different armies and factions and unites them in an effort against the Crusader states. In 1187, he seized Jerusalem for the Muslims. So he taken it back under Muslim control. So now prompting the Third Crusade, which lasts roughly from 1189 to 1192. Well, at this point, of course, it's nearly 100 years later, you have a new pope in charge, and that is Pope Innocent III. Now, Celestine III is over the beginning of it, 1180, 1191 to 1198. And Pope Innocent III. But both of these men are running the church in a time where the church is solidifying and expanding its power in Europe over political affairs and now over military affairs as well. Essentially ordering these countries to wage war against the Muslims in the Middle East. And the religious fervor of the time, they're getting a lot of support for it. So Saladin at this point seizes Jerusalem. The Pope at that time, Clement III, is appealing to France and Germany and Britain send in troops. Well, they do, but Third Crusade turns out to be a disaster. They have, among others, Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, Holy Roman Empire. You've got Philip II of France. Now, he's the one that wants to divorce his wife, but Innocent III won't let him. And then Richard I of England.
Does all that on this side go together?
I think it was the popes at the time period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you about it.
Okay.
Clement III, Celestine III, Innocent III.
Popes of the second.
Yeah, popes in the second and third crusade period. Or popes the third and fourth. This is really when the church is reaching the height of its power in Europe, particularly under these men. Innocent III especially believing that all royal authority exists because of the church's power. Well, Richard I is Richard the Lionheart. But for a lot of his courage and everything, he's actually French by birth and actually speaks more French than English. Doesn't like being king of England, so he spends most of his reign as king outside of England. The chance for a crusade emerges. Oh, he's all for it. Lead the men in battle, go halfway around the world as far from England as he can possibly go. So they land here on the coast of Palestine, or capture Jerusalem. But it's a disaster from the start. In 1189, just as they arrive, Frederick Barbarossa tries wading ashore from the ship to his heavy armor, wading the ocean to run ashore and drowns. Very bizarre accident. They say it's an accident. They say. But wading in water with heavy tide and wearing armor, it's probably was never a good idea. So Philip II and Richard I are basically stuck here. The German army goes home. And France and England basically trying to push inland to try to reach Jerusalem, but because the Muslim forces are basically fairly well emplaced, they're able to move beyond the beachheads. They're able to move beyond the support of their naval forces. So they're basically stuck here for 3 years. And all this time, the people of England have to pay for this war. Very expensive. Remember the story about the Robin Hood legends? That's this time period. Robin Hood, more of a semi-legendary figure, but I believe that basically he may have been a real person. Some of the stories may be exaggerated. A lot of protests have had over how England was being run during this time period. Because when Richard left, he left his brother, Prince John, in charge of England.
So he wasn't Prince John.
Really was. He'd been King John after this. Well, guess what? You have this huge crusade, very expensive. Richard had to raise taxes very high to support this army and send it all the way over to Israel. Well, guess who has to stay home and collect all those taxes? Prince John. He's getting the blame for it. He's accused of all this corruption, these high taxes, while the noble King Richard is off fighting, defending the faith way over in Israel. So, John is not developing a good reputation here. A lot of protests against his rule, a lot of unrest in England. So England's having a lot of financial problems because of these high taxes. While Richard is off trying to be a hero. Well, after 3 years of this, in 1192, Richard negotiated a peace settlement with Saladin to allow Christian pilgrims to enter Jerusalem, allowing them safe passage, and then at that point, the French and English armies go home. Well, Richard decides to take the long route back. He travels mostly in a small group back across the continent of England. And on his return trip, Richard and his party is captured by the Duke of Vienna. So they're in Austria, basically being held captive. The Duke of Vienna would release King Richard, but England has to pay a very hefty king's ransom. You get the term king's ransom from. And eventually England pays up that. Saladin, who is the main motive force behind Muslims retaking Jerusalem and the Third Crusade itself, dies the next year in 1193. At that same point, you have the church calling for yet another crusade. This will be the Fourth Crusade. Well, the call goes out in 1193, but they're not able to get a lot of troops, a lot of support for this one. The fights aren't going well. The last two were very inconclusive. And they see the Muslims steadily retaking lost ground. So by 1203, a Crusader army is being organized, but not quite sure what to do at this point. So in 1203, the Venetians, basically the city-state of Venice in Italy, already having emerged as a powerful trading force in the Mediterranean, decided to take this Crusader army of good Roman Catholics determined to defend the faith and turn it not against the Middle East, not against the Muslims in the Holy Lands, but against Constantinople, which was Orthodox and Venice's greatest trading competitor at this point. Basically sending this army in to attack the competition. See, what's happening at this time is there's a succession dispute in Constantinople. The emperor died, no clear successor, so you have two factions competing for control of the throne. Well, one of the factions decides to take the support of these Crusaders placed on the throne and announces that the new emperor now announces that he will submit to the Pope in Rome rather than the Orthodox Patriarch, horrifying the people of Constantinople, who are, at this point, as far much against Rome as they could possibly be. They are Orthodox, they are not Catholic. They take this as a slap in the face. So the people overthrew the new emperor. So the Crusader attack on Constantinople was 50 snags. They won the battle, but their new emperor has been forced out off the throne. And so the Crusaders respond in 1204 by retaking Constantinople, everything they've got, burning a quarter of the city in its process and plundering its wealth. The last thing that Constantinople needed. They've been sacked by a Christian army. And the Crusaders at this point set themselves up in Constantinople as the Latin Empire of Constantinople. So while the Byzantine Empire is facing threats from the north, and particularly from the Muslims in Asia Minor, they now have to fight a civil war to get the Catholic Crusaders out of Constantinople and retake control of their capital. Basically, they've got the Orthodox forces, loyal to the other factions, have basically the areas outside of Constantinople, most of Greece, Western Turkey, and so forth. But the Crusaders have the heart of the empire, Constantinople itself. And so what you have is a civil war lasting 57 years. Until the Latin Empire, Constantinople, Crusader forces are ousted, and the Orthodox forces retake the city. And by that point, there's almost nothing left of the Byzantine Empire. Basically, portions of what is now southern Greece and the city of Constantinople itself. And that'll basically be it until Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. It's been the next 2 centuries just kind of drifting along. So, Fourth Crusade, total disaster. What they ended up doing in the process by so severely weakening Constantinople is the Crusader armies will basically have now allowed a path for the Muslims to invade southeastern Europe. The Turks finally emerged on the scene. But during the reign of Innocent III, you have a couple of very bizarre, very sad chapters of the Crusades. Particularly one, the Albigensian Crusade. So that's from 1209 to 1229. Now, Albigensians are a group of heretics in southern France. They had denounced church corruption, rejected the Old Testament, rejected baptism and the priesthood, and preached a strict ascetic life. Basically, no worldly goods. They're pacifists, living without strict life of poverty, just trying to follow the example of Christ, and rejecting church organization. Because their beliefs are so contrary to the Catholic Church, and they're thumbing their nose at the authority of the Pope decides Albigensians have to go, and orders a crusade to wipe them out. Albigensians, they are Christians. They are opposed to the church. They are pacifists, living a life of poverty and of faith, but essentially unarmed men, women, and children. Based mostly in southern France. So for the next 20 years, the Albigensians suffer horrible torture, burnings at the stake, villages burned, mass executions, or being totally defeated. Thousands upon thousands are killed. Then in 1212 you have the bizarre and sad tale of the Children's Crusade. This is all while the Albigensian Crusade is going on. It's all while the Fourth Lateran Council is going on. All fitting together. Again, trying to drive out any nonconformity in the faith, heresy, blasphemy, corruption. Basically trying to retake the world, trying to take the entire world for the Catholic Church.
All this for the church.
Yeah. It's all this for the faith.
This is the same as a holy war, right?
Yeah, this is a holy war. They're saying this is for, they're fighting this war, burning these cities, killing women and children for God. God said, love thy neighbor. I'm kind of missing the point a little bit. Well, the two main figures in the Children's Crusade. One is a 10-year-old boy named Nicholas of Cologne. Lives in the city of Cologne in the Holy Roman Empire. Well, Nicholas urges the children of Cologne to join him in a crusade to retake Jerusalem. This kind of starts off as a child's fancy and child's game. This spirals out of control. It's like watching one of Cartman's schemes on South Park. And just, how does this happen? But somehow it does.
All with you again.
Yep.
All with you again.
10 years old. Well, eventually you have, like I said, they're marching off to take the Holy Lands. More children joining in, and there's all these other kids going, they start rushing into. And eventually about 20,000 children, aged 6 to 18, joined them and followed them to Italy to seek passage of the Holy Lands. They can find these ships docked at these ports, Venice, Florence, Rome, wherever they can, and go to the Holy Lands. At the same time, you have a French youth named Stephen, who was a shepherd, received a vision to retake the Holy Lands, urging the children to join him, and eventually some 30,000 joined him on a trek to Marseille, the ports here in southern France, to seek passage to Syria. Well, as they move further south, it starts falling apart. Nicholas's followers began to disperse when they reached the Alps. Very steep mountain passes. Got a lot of little kids there. Except no food or anything. They can't make it past the Alps, so they just stop. Some dying, some just sitting by the side of the road abandoned. But a lot do make it through to Italy, and the ships in Italy refuse to give them passage, so they are not going to take these kids and drop them off in the Middle East to fight these armies. Parents didn't know where they were. Thousands and thousands of children just up and running away. Parents could keep up with it. By the time parents knew what was going on in these different villages, they didn't know where the kids were. Some tried to find them, but
They don't know.
couldn't find them.
They don't know what motivation was or anything.
Yep. All they know is the story. Is a little kid named Nicholas in Cologne said they're going to retake the Holy Lands, and all the kids decided they're going to join in. So they've been listening to the cathedrals all their lives about how they needed to destroy the Muslims once and for all, and their faith demanded they had to do it. So they're good Christians, and they're going to do it, and these kids decided, well, if the adults can't do it, we'll do it instead.
Right back.
Yeah. Actually, it seems it's kind of cartoonish and bizarre. How could this happen? But it did. You got these huge crowd, these little kids. Parents can't tell which one's which. And they can't even reach them. They try calling out. You have all these kids screaming, chanting on the way. Nobody can hear them. And the kids are caught up in the excitement of it. Nobody can find them. They get to Stephen's followers get to Marseille. The story actually gets a little worse. In Italy, the ships refused the kids their passage. Here, the ships did. Sure, they'll take the little kids, step onto the nice ship. Instead of taking them to Syria or Palestine, they take them to North Africa and sell all these little kids into slavery.
Wow.
Years afterward, European travelers in North Africa reported seeing these kids grown up, trapped in slavery there for the rest of their lives. Said most followers of Stephen in North Africa, most of these kids from Nicholas's expedition never saw their parents again.
But why though?
It's like I said, they'd grown up in these cathedrals, hearing these cathedrals all their lives, that their faith, they're Christians, they've got to retake the Holy Lands. It's their duty to destroy Muslims. It's their duty to destroy enemies of the church. So they have that mindset. And a couple little kids in all this convinced them, let's go retake the Holy Lands. Let's have an adventure. Now they're thinking like little kids. They think it's like it's a game.
It's a game. Right?
Yeah. But they don't realize what a dangerous decision it is. They don't realize the consequences of it. That's why it's a war crime to put children in combat, because they don't understand the consequences of their actions. They think it's just a game. Right now, countries around the world, there are 10-year-old kids being have a machine gun shoved in their hands that go kill these people.
But that's for survival, most of them. But
Actually, in these countries, fight or die, but a lot of cases it's these warlords saying, I need warm bodies firing guns, and they tell these little kids, go kill these people. Kids don't realize that, understand the consequences of their actions.
Same thing with like the people strapping the bombs to the little kids and making them,
Yeah.
you know.
It's the exact same thinking. It's, you will die a martyr for your faith. You must do that as a member of this faith. Here. Grown-ups are using little kids
To
for
do
their
their
own
dirty
twisted,
work.
yeah, twisted, dirty work. That was the world of the 13th century. That is the world of the 21st century.
What was the adults and all? I mean, I understand that you said that, you know, the parents didn't, it wasn't, by the time they found out, everything was taking place.
They
Who
probably,
was selling these ships? Who was the one
Yeah.
showing them the way to go to, like, which way to?
Like I said, the kids could figure it out. Kids knew something about the geography, knowing going, France knowing to go south, Germany knowing to go south. And they kind of ask directions along the way. Kids are picking up along the way, joining the excitement. They tell them, yeah, it's just this way. Follow this road.
18-year-olds would lead it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that none of them understanding the consequences of what was happening. Just a big game till suddenly reality sinks in. Oh, it's dark. You're a long way from home. Where's mom and dad?
okay, so there wasn't anybody, like, an adult with them at all?
No.
So who sold them? They sold themselves into slavery?
No, they were kidnapped.
Okay, I was
Yeah, they're kidnapped. Basically, they're lured onto the ship to do bombers. Yeah.
They was tricked.
Yeah. They said, lured into the little white van. Sure, little kid, come on board.
Okay.
It's that bad. Remember, this is centuries before they teach about don't talk to strangers. This is centuries before Amber Alerts. Yeah, parents love their kids, but kids are working in the fields a lot during this time. Kids are running around the villages while they're working. By the time they realize what's going on, it's hours later.
Yeah.
Some kids doing adult things, but they shouldn't be doing.
Exactly.
And was he like a pirate that sold the kids into slavery?
Yeah. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin emerges from this time period. It's an allegory for the church, Judaism, and the Children's Crusade. The Pied Piper comes in with his playing his little flute. Town of Hamelin is beset by an infestation of rats. Kind of real slur on Jews, but that's what it was meant for. Horrible. It's not something you can call anybody. But the church giving this song and dance problems, oh, they'll get rid of all their problems. So they have to pay up for it. So Pied Piper leads the promises for a price. He'll lead the rats out of town. People agree. He does so. Playing his little tune that leads them all along the path outside of town, never to be seen again.
Yes.
Then the people of Hamelin turn on the Pied Piper, refuse to pay. So the Pied Piper has his revenge. Plays his little tune, chants all the children, and he leads them out of town, marching away, never to be seen again. Just like Children's Crusade. Story dating back to the 13th century.
I really love that story.
Yeah.
I thought Pied Piper was supposed to be good, you know, they had like all these little cartoons.
Well,
You twist to it.
remember, most Disney tales you see, they are cleaned up because they want little kids to watch it. So they're not all the graphic tales you see.
But there's a lot of stuff in Disney movies that you like.
Yeah, in every Disney movie, the parents die.
Yeah. Whenever I was younger, you know, I never realized that some of the stuff that happened in Disney movies. And then you go back and I saw this thing like on Facebook or something, and it was telling you like all the weird things that were in the Disney movies that you never caught on to as a kid.
Yeah. Like say that
A lot more.
a lot of the fairy tales, as kids were German origin. Grimm's fairy tales, they were very dark, very graphic. Little Red Riding Hood, the grandmother and the little girl were both eaten, and they had to slice open the wolf to get him out. You don't see that in the cartoon. Tale Frozen, that was a old Danish fairy tale.
Frozen?
Yeah. But the story of the Ice Queen was not this nice, friendly little blonde girl who's singing songs in the frozen wasteland. No, it is this dark, evil queen threatening to kill people in real life. Yeah. I think the story of the boy who cried wolf. In fact, it's supposed to be an admonition against lying. Remember this TV show once. This guy's trying to convince this other guy not to lie. Star Trek, so he's humans telling the story to an alien. He said, and after telling this same lie several times, when the wolf finally came, no one believed the little boy who cried wolf, and the wolf ate him up. And the alien said, that story's a little graphic for children. But those are the stories. Very dark, very sinister, trying to warn kids about stepping out of line. Well, there are later Crusades after this. Kind of winding down, not as conclusive, still a lot of violence and bloodshed, but the last of the major ones is in 1270, ending that inconclusively. But in 1291, Christians were defeated at Acre, forcing to surrender the last of the Crusader states. The Crusades are ended, and the Holy Lands will remain under Muslim control. But what you start seeing, though, in this time period, 12th and 13th centuries, in spite of the Crusades, is a renewed growth of cities. Trade is re-emerging. You see here in your book on page yada, yada, yada. Well, the trade routes are emerging and starting up again. Partially to help pilgrims going to these religious sites, partially to armies, supply armies, supply countries, and so forth. But a lot of merchants are establishing settlements near some fortified strongholds, such as a castle or a monastery. That words in English like borough and burg, and those letters, burg with an H. German is just B-U-R-G. Basically means fortress or walled enclosure. So since there are these little settlements, these little trading posts, the equivalent of modern-day truck stops, I guess, are near these fortresses in the monasteries. They got these things afterward. Edinburgh in Scotland, and Nuremberg, and Hamburg in Germany, so forth. And slowly, these cities are growing and expanding, and people are escaping from these local manors and start living in cities. And local lords who control the land are giving these small settlements basically charters of independence. Basically, they're set up and operate their own communities. Now, by 1300, the largest city in England was London with almost 40,000 people. The large trading cities this time probably would be more than about 5,000 people. But south of the Alps, you have large trading cities like Venice, Florence, Genoa, and Milan, all having populations over 100,000 people. But another thing was fueling the growth of cities, people moving from the countryside, from the manors, to the cities. Old German idea. Stadtluft macht frei. German means the town air makes you free. That was being drilled into the peasants all over Central and Western Europe. Town air makes you free. Meant, according to tradition, if you were in a city for a year and a day, You were freed from all manorial obligations. You were no longer a serf, you were a free man. You just had to escape to the cities. Stop left behind slave. But of course, the town area isn't that good. There's no sewage in a lot of these newer cities. Older Roman trading cities had the old Roman sewer systems. They weren't very well maintained and weren't very useful anymore. Cities are small, crowded, wooden, dirty. Water is often contaminated by tanning acids, local tanners, butchers pouring all blood and the waste products into the local river and drinking supply. Animal and human waste deposited in the backyard privies or into the streets. Everything's being pulled by mules and horses, so what do you have? You have a lot of animal waste. So the city smelled really good back July and August. But nevertheless, in spite of these unhealthy beginnings, the cities are starting to emerge. And perhaps the most important advance in the development of the Middle Ages was the rise of the university. It comes from the Latin word universitas, which means guild. And basically, universities are being established as training centers for the upper classes. Basically, these are groups of teachers getting together and basically applying their trades. The university, therefore, is basically a community of teachers. Now, the first European university appeared in Bologna, Italy, in 1158. So all the traditions you have as college students, they are dating back to the Middle Ages. The tradition of college education is now 900 years old. Now, what happened at this point was Irnerius had rediscovered Justinian's body of civil law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, found a monastery, and basically used this to help train merchants and administrators in Italy so they can figure out the problems they're having with the contract disputes and property law. So Bologna is established as the first university, primarily teaching Justinian's Corpus Juris Civilis. Now, eventually more charters are granted to these students. More universities formed and expanded. Oxford University, for example, was founded in 1208. A group of teachers unhappy at Oxford moved off and formed Cambridge in 1209. The universities are more than 800 years old. But basically, though, the universities, as their own communities, they establish their own rules of conduct for students. And essentially, here in these classes, the professors would read from that one book available. Not everyone had a book. You just had this one book being read by the professor. And that was it. You'd be having professors read these books and these lectures for several years. There would be no final exam or exams within a semester. You just took one final exam at the end of your course of studies. You felt you're ready. You'd sit before a board of your professors. Of course, the tradition of Oxford is you'd have a pint of beer while you did your oral final exams. You got to take the edge off. And basically, these professors would be grilling you for hours about all your course studies, making you recite things verbatim. This is one final exam. That's it for everything. It's about 4 years after studying.
After 4 years?
Yeah.
And you never had a test or anything?
Never had a test or anything. Just that one oral exam before all of your professors.
You just had to recall all this information.
Yep, you had to sit there and memorize it.
I could take notes.
You can take notes. Oh, yeah. You can take notes. You can listen. And he said you had people from all walks of life. You had young students, you had old students, but all men. Of course, you have some who are, the picture here in the book of a medieval university. Here, page 262, you see these people sitting here, some carefully listening, some taking notes, some asleep. Basically, it's a modern college classroom. But you had three possible majors here in your universities. And those were law, medicine, and theology. Because theology is the most popular one, but sometimes they've got 2 or 3 degrees. You have your bachelor's degree at the end of 4 years, basically as a teaching license. You can go back for a master's degree, and you can go back for a doctorate. The doctorate was more just simply learning learning more information on a particular major. It was basically learning how to contribute and give back to that particular field of study. So even today, doctoral students have to write a dissertation, basically the research paper / book, contributing to the profession. When I got my doctorate, that I had to do, I'd write 300 pages on one text of the lecture. Plenty of information. It was a lot of fun. But it took me over a year to write it.
It took you over a year to write it.
I didn't have a due date, so I could take as long as I wanted on it. But these guilds,
Do they grade it?
they graded.
What did you make?
I said, made, and they said, here, you got a doctorate. I'd have oral finals as well, going back to this old tradition. I had to defend it to my professors. They call it doctoral defense. It's a lot of work, but it is worth it at the end. Now, the guilds the universities are based on, this is used for all other professions as well. It's like primitive trade unions. They get people together in one particular field. They set the standards for how the profession will be conducted, prices they'll charge a particular area, and how to train new people coming in. So you have guilds for carpenters, bricklayers, you name it. Like I say, shoemakers, just anything in the world. And what happened is about 6 or 7, age 6 or 7 children, usually boys, would be apprenticed to a master craftsman in the field. Again, supervised by the guild, but basically the kids spend the next 12, 13 years learning this profession. Yeah, like an internship, unpaid. You'd be living there, basically do exactly what the master craftsman said. At that point, you take a test for the guild and become what's called move from apprentice to becoming but you move up to the next level where you could work alongside other master craftsmen, including your own. And then at the end of it, probably at age 20, 25, you could take your make your final exam before the guild and become a master craftsman. You had to produce something in the field, basically a masterpiece, to prove you had mastered the profession. But that was an example of how the guild worked and how they trained skilled laborers through this long drawn out process. But you also have important changes taking place around the world. For example, in England, 1066, Edward the Confessor died. Called the Confessor because he was so devoted to his faith, more so than being a politician, and died without children. So his nephews, Edward's nephews, Harold Godwinson and William of Normandy, both claiming the throne. Harold II is killed by William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. William of Normandy seizes control of England as William the Conqueror, goes out, surveys lands, and issues the Domesday Book, basically a survey of all the landowners and property owners, basically a process of giving Englishmen their last names through that Domesday Book. Basically describing who somebody is. Sometimes that's why a lot of people of English descent have a last names connected to profession. Smith, which is basically a craftsman, or carpenter, basically, you're a carpenter or a baker, something like that. Sometimes some physical characteristic, brown, or brown hair, or something like that. Sometimes place things. That's from the Domesday Book. But eventually, where some kings trying to establish themselves as all-powerful rulers, they're having some problems in some areas, particularly England. You have a lot of nobles and landowners who are very powerful, and they don't want to give that kind of power to the king. So, in point here, you got King John, ruling from 1199 to 1216. He's promoted to king after the death of his brother, Richard I. And here's the thing, England's out of money. He needs money, he tries to raise taxes again on his own, but the nobles are saying, no, you're not. In fact, there may be limits on what you can do as king. In the city of Brandywine in 1215, the nobles basically, pretty much at knife point, except King John to accept the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which was basically a list of limitations on the rights, limitations on the powers of the king. And what he can and can't do, and spelling out the rights of the nobility. Among other things, right to property, right to due process of law. This became the foundation of civil liberties in the English system, which later transferred to the United States. Magna Carta. It's an extremely important development in civil liberties. Basically, one of the first major documents to specifically list out the rights of the individual. Now, by the 1300s, England would be establishing a parliament, eventually as an advisory body to the king, but later an elected representative body. Initially, though, it's only the upper classes could vote, the largest landowners. After that, Parliament gradually starts becoming the English government. France does something similar in 1302 with the States General. Get a representative body, initially decide to help the king make decisions, but eventually becomes, like Parliament, the main tax-making body of the French government. States General is divided into the three different classes of French society in the Middle Ages. The nobility, that is, the royal family and the title of nobles, the clergy, Roman Catholic clergy, Roman Catholic officials, and the peasants, basically everybody else. But then three distinct houses, but each house gets only one vote, but the upper class nobility and the clergy usually always outvoted the peasants. The later French kings got tired of listening to the States General and eventually just dismissed it altogether. But you start seeing, though, here with the Magna Carta, the British Parliament, and the States General, though, as a slow, gradual move away from absolute power towards representative government. The very beginnings of it here. By the time the American colonies were established later, representative parliament, Magna Carta, due process of law are old hat to the English. And that is and now we come to the end of our lecture.